The year is 1453. The cannons have fallen silent. The fields of France no longer churn with the march of English armies. After more than a century of bloodshed, the 100 Years' War, one of history's longest and most brutal conflicts, has finally ended. Kings have signed their treaties. Towns and cities, battered by generations of war, tentatively begin to rebuild. But for those who sail across the narrow, unpredictable waters of the Channel, the war's echoes are far from distant. On England's shores, a new kind of battle is about to begin. Battle waged not with swords or arrows, but with suspicion, prejudice, and survival. The French merchants are coming, and England is not ready to forgive. Their arrival was almost imperceptible at first. A ship from Rouen, its hold filled with barrels of claret. A caravan from Paris, weighed down with bolts of velvet and fine lace. A fisherman from Dieppe, trading salted herring along the southern coasts. Trade had been the bloodline between England and the continent for centuries. In normal times, goods crossed the Channel as easily as the tides, but these were not normal times. For the common Englishman, the French were not just former enemies, they were the embodiment of betrayal, cowardice, and cruelty. Children had been raised on stories of French treachery. Soldiers had buried their comrades in foreign soil, cursing the fleur-de-lis with their final breath. The sight of a Frenchman in an English marketplace was like a splinter lodged in an old wound. A reminder that though the battles had ended, the hatred remained. French merchants understood the danger. Some displayed royal charters or letters of safe conduct parchments bearing the wax seals of kings, promising protection. Others wore crosses or badges indicating their right to trade under limited license. But no piece of paper could shield them from the looks, the whispers, the clenched fists barely restrained. In the busy lanes of London's Cheapside, Southampton's bustling ports, and the growing cloth markets of York, the tension was palpable. Local guilds, already protective of their privileges, were quick to sound the alarm. Frenchmen were accused of undercutting English traders, of flooding the markets with cheap goods, of stealing the livelihoods of honest English families. The worshipful company of grocers, the mercers, the drapers, all powerful guilds with deep influence over city governance, lobbied the crown to restrict foreign traders. They demanded higher tolls, heavier taxes, and sometimes outright bans on French imports. "Let them peddle their wares among their own kind," cried one alderman during a raucous city meeting recorded in the archives of London. Some towns imposed the alien taxes special levy, placed on foreign merchants simply for doing business. The message was clear. You are not one of us. You will pay for the privilege of your presence. For many French traders, survival required cunning. Some sought English partners who could front for them in transactions, hiding their nationality behind a native face. Others adapted their wares to English tastes, tailoring their offerings carefully to avoid jealousy. Still, no amount of caution could prevent the occasional spark from igniting into flame. There were riots in Southampton. In 1461, a French cloth merchant's booth was burned to the ground by angry apprentices. In London, a rumour that a French wine trader had insulted the memory of an English king led to a brutal beating in broad daylight, and across smaller towns, dozens of lesser-known incidents left a trail of blood, broken carts, and scattered goods in their wake. Among the merchants were men like Pierre Dufour, a once prosperous cloth dealer from Bordeaux. Pierre had lost everything when English forces overran his home province decades earlier. His vineyards were torched, his home reduced to rubble. When peace finally came, he saw in England an opportunity for redemption, a chance to rebuild what had been taken from him. He arrived in London with his wife and 2 small children, hauling bolts of fine linen and a heart full of weary hope. At first, he found some success. English gentry craved the continental fashions they had glimpsed during wartime campaigns, the draping silks, the fine embroidery, the elegant hats. Pierre's goods, rare and expensive, found eager buyers. But with success came danger. Competing English traders, embittered by his popularity, began to spread rumors. Pierre cheated his customers. Pierre worshipped strange foreign gods. Pierre had come not to trade but to spy for the King of France. One evening, as Pierre packed up his stall, a group of men attacked. His goods were looted. His son beaten unconscious. Pierre himself barely escaped with his life, fleeing into the tangled alleys of London's East End. He never returned to Cheapside. Instead, he eked out a quiet living in a forgotten parish, taking on mending work, teaching his children to speak English without a trace of their heritage. Pierre's story was not unique. Across England, dozens, perhaps hundreds, of French traders lived similar tragedies, their ambitions crushed by the invisible hand of hatred. Those who survived learned to adapt. Some married English spouses, forging bonds that blurred the lines between native and foreigner. Intermarriage was one of the most effective ways to gain a foothold. Family loyalty often trumped national prejudice. Names changed too. Jean de Vain became John Vane. Marguerite de Bayeux became Margaret Bales. Small linguistic shifts, small sacrifices of identity that brought a measure of safety. Others sought protection from powerful patrons. Nobles who valued the luxury of French goods sometimes shielded their favored merchants, offering them letters of commendation or allowing them to operate within castle towns where royal authority kept the mobs at bay. But even among the adapted, fear lingered. One wrong word, one unlucky day, could unravel everything. The crown itself vacillated between encouraging trade and appeasing anti-foreign sentiment. In 1471, Edward IV issued proclamations welcoming foreign merchants under certain conditions, but by 1477, increased tensions with France led to new tariffs and restrictions. The political winds shifted constantly. To be French in England was to live forever with one's fate tied to forces far beyond individual control. By the turn of the 16th century, the sharpness of English hatred toward the French had dulled, but it had not disappeared. The grandchildren of the original French merchants often lived indistinguishable from their English peers. Their names were English, their loyalties were English. Few spoke the old tongue anymore, except in hushed prayer. And yet, the traces remained. In city records, surnames hinting at Norman or Breton origins, in church registers, mentions of foreign births gradually fading into obscurity. In place names and marketplaces, the ghost of a forgotten commerce. England itself was changing too. New threats loomed on the horizon: Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and distant rumors of unknown continents across vast oceans. The hatred that had once burned against the French now flickered toward new targets. The French merchants of the post-Hundred Years' War era were not saints. They were not villains. They were survivors, ordinary men and women who crossed a hostile sea, bearing their hopes like precious cargo, who risked everything not for glory, but for the simple dream of a life lived in peace. Their story is a hidden chapter of England's history, a story of the long, painful birth of a modern nation, where identity would no longer be bound by blood alone, but shaped by the stubborn, ordinary courage of strangers who refused to leave. Today, when we walk through the bustling streets of London or sip a glass of Bordeaux at a local pub, we tread unknowingly over their footsteps. Their struggle is our inheritance. Their quiet victories, their perseverance, their hope are woven into the fabric of the world we know. The next time history tempts us to divide ourselves into us and them, to draw hard lines between native and foreigner, remember the French merchants. Remember what they suffered. Remember what they built. And remember that peace is never given freely. It is bought choice by choice, day by day, by those brave enough to cross hostile seas with only hope as their shield.